Oh, so it's funny. I'm last week's solo, which I immediately finished and felt like it was a failure, but I can't remember why now. Uh, I wanted to talk about this thing that I wrote a G file about last week, and it's this thing about. And I'm not going to do it justice here, but it's something I sort of, as I'm getting older, as I'm an empty nester, as I'm going into the sort of heavy slog of helping to build an institution with the dispatch, as part of this put this in my head was the sort of wake party thing I had for my mom at the White Horse Tavern, where I saw all these slices of people from different aspects of my life. And, there were moments of it which were pretty uncomfortable, weird, awkward for me. To see, the different people in my life interacting with each other. And, the real straw that stirred the drink were my high school buddies. But the point of that, of the piece was that the way we talk about identity is really shallow and constrained. And you've heard me talk about identity politics. I wrote a whole book where identity politics is a big part of the problem with what faces the West. I don't like this idea of reducing people to a single, largely abstract category. If you think, as I think I put it in the piece, if you think that, like, if I ask you who Albert Einstein was and you say some Jew, well, you're kind of telling on yourself, right? If I ask you who Martin Luther King was and you say a black guy, you are the one who is reducing somebody's actual lived experience, real world contributions, sort of their ineffable real identity, and reducing it to this abstract category of race or ethnicity or whatever, or skin color. And that's gross. And that's what racists do. And it's what anti-racists do. And I mean, like, this is something I got in a lot of trouble for in liberal fascism, but like, part of the argument in that is that identitarianism, which is a fancy word for just simply reducing people to their skin color or some other, one-dimensional aspect of their persona, is a phenomenon of the left. It's also these days increasingly a real phenomenon of the right. And that's one of the reasons why, if I was going to write the book again, if I were going to do another version, I would have to update a bunch of that stuff, because as I wrote on the anniversary of January 6th a while back, I did not appreciate, when I wrote liberal fascism, the susceptibility of the American right to a lot of this garbage. And anyway, that's a conversation for another day. The point is that, so when we talk about identity, real identity, like when we're talking about like the unique traits of an individual, the things that make you ontologically different from every other human, that's a much deeper reservoir of experiences, of perspectives. It's a whole portfolio. And so I sort of made fun of it, but like, there's this it's portfolio management is sort of the key to life. I'm no expert on investing and all these kinds of things, but I know enough, like just conventional stuff, that you're supposed to have a balanced portfolio, right? And when you're younger, you can have more risky stuff, and as you get older, you have more, sort of annuities and fewer equities and, that kind of stuff. But also, even if you're going to have all just stocks or whatever, you don't want them all in one company or even in one sector. You want to, spread out your risks, put as many reasonable chips on the roulette board as you can, in the hopes that some will pay off, and the ones that don't pay off will be compensated for by the other. Right? Portfolio management. People know what I mean by portfolio management, and I think until I can find a better metaphor, it's an important way to think about how to live your life, where you do not, it's one of the oldest themes of this podcast is I'm against, all forms of monism, which is, singleism, one thingism, right? Existential, philosophical, financial, political monism is always bad. What's the line in City Slickers where Curly says, in all my years I've figured out that life boils down to, and he holds up one finger and he says, this. And Billy Crystal's like, what's this? And he says, one thing. And Billy Crystal's like, well, what's the one thing? And was it Jack Palance, Curly says, that you're going to have to figure out for yourself. Sounds good. Great scene. Total nonsense. Life isn't about one thing. Life is about many things. My favorite kinds of meals, I got this from my dad, are when you have a table full of all sorts of little things, and including leftovers, I don't care, where you get to eat from a bunch of different plates. Like the Mediterranean kind of way is the most fun way to eat for me. It's the most fun way to live life. Now, there are people who have different personalities than me, and they're more focused on the one way thing than I am, but even they aren't pure one wayers. If the only thing in your life is your job, that's going to be a fairly thin, sad life, I think. Now, there are going to be people who are outliers, right? Black swans or whatever, for whom that approach really, really paid off. But for most people, if all you have is your job, it's sad. And it doesn't mean the job can't be the most important thing in your life. That's fine. It depends what your job is. And it depends on your own personality. But if there's a difference between the most important thing and the only thing. My family is the most important thing to me, but it's not the only thing to me. And I think there are people who confuse this point all the time. Like, if I made my wife the one thing in my life, first of all, we wouldn't be able to pay the mortgage. There'd be all sorts of practical real world problems, but also I'd piss off my wife. Can I take care of that for you? Can I do that for you? What do you want to do today? Let's go out today. People need other things in their lives. If I did that to my daughter, I'd raise her badly. What you need are a bunch of different priorities that you're going to have to balance them. You don't have to have equal numbers of shares of every stock, but, you can weight them as you see fit, but, you want a portfolio of commitments in your life. And one of the benefits of having a portfolio of commitments, friendships, associations, institutions, whatever, is that, you get to be slightly a different person in these different aspects of your life. Now, I'll write about it someday, this grander theory about how this is actually how you shape your sense of integrity and your character by figuring out what you want to hold constant in all of these different spheres of your life and what you think is sort of negotiable or what can be turned on or turned off or turned down, like a dimmer switch in your personality. I have friends, I still feel bad about this. I've never talked to Klon about this, but the first time I met Klon Kitchen was at a AI conference at Sea Island. And you look at Klon, that he sort of did all this manly stuff in the military or the military adjacent, let's say. And he's got that beard and he looks like, sort of a rough and tumble kind of guy. It turns out that Klon can handle himself and he's done all sorts of manly stuff that I will never be able to compete with. But he's actually a very sweet, very pious, decent human being that, looks like he should be in a knife fight in a bar, but actually that's not who he is at all. And I felt bad as I told him this story with this dirty joke in it, the first time I met him, and he gave me this look ugh, because it was like telling David French a dirty joke. It's just not something I automatically will do. I mean, I joke about this all the time, but like I'm much more comfortable telling dirty jokes to Sarah than I am to David. And but anyway, my point is like there are people with whom I'm one kind, I'm much bawdier and will tell, you know, dirtier jokes and have more inappropriate conversations. And there are other people with whom that would be just like totally inappropriate. It doesn't mean they're not my friends. And there's this idea that people get where you say, well, I can be my real self with this person or these people. And I think that misconstrues the reality of it. They're all your real self to one extent or another. Like I would not try to do shots and tell dirty jokes with Yuval Levin, but Yuval is my friend and I value him enormously. And I would not have the conversations I have comfortably and easily with Yuval with some of my buddies from high school. Doesn't mean like I'm the real me with my buddies from high school. I'm the fake me with Yuval, or vice versa. These are different aspects of yourself. They're different slices of your personal portfolio. And the great thing about having these different places where you can be different aspects of yourself is that you value these different aspects of yourself to different degrees. And it helps you sort of have a more well-balanced life. And these different parts of your life inform the other parts. Anyway, so that was it went longer and deeper and all that kind of stuff. And I'm really grateful for the reaction from people. But I had a friend. I actually know him in the real world now, but I knew him for years as an email friend from starting in my NR days. If you go back and you look in the old archives of the Corner at NR, you might remember him as my Oakshot guy, because he's this sort of self-taught. He's got some real job at the Ramjack Corporation or something like that. I'm not using his name because I don't have permission to. But he's a very decent guy, and I've met him in the real world a couple times. I met him in the airport not long ago. He came to a couple AI conferences. Anyway, he's this sort of self-taught expert on Michael Oakeshott, and he has been, in a decent and friendly way, pestering me to fight for the incorporation of Michael Oakeshott's thought into more of American conservatism. And at his bidding, I actually wrote a G file a while back, maybe Guy can put in the show notes, where I sort of did a deep dive on enterprise associations versus civic associations, which is this concept in Oakeshott that I think is actually really, really important. But anyway, none of that is relevant to this, except for that he sent me a note after the this life portfolio G file, where he made the really interesting point. I mean, I talked about this sort of metaphorically, buy and hold. You invest in institutions and you stick with them over the long term, because the longer you're with an institution, the longer an institution exists, the more value it has, the deeper its roots are, the more important it is for shaping character, the more important it is for you suspending your self-interest and investing in the long-term interest of the institution. Nobody wants to ruin. If you're put in charge of an old institution, the last thing in the world you want to do is be the last person to run the institution. What you want is to hand it off, right? This gets into Yuval's stuff about gratitude. Anyway, so I had this whole thing about buy and hold, and old friends are valuable in ways that new friends aren't. Doesn't mean that new friends aren't great, but old friends are different. I think everybody understands that. And anyway, Oakeshott guy made this great point that I wish I had put in the piece, where he sort of takes the analogy about portfolios and buy and hold, and he says, isn't there a sort of, and I'm quoting this from memory, but like he makes the point that, financial advisors will tell you the worst thing you can do is just constantly check your portfolio every single day, because you will overestimate the losses and you will underestimate the gains, and you will sort of get addicted, sort of to the refresh button, and you're more likely to panic early and sell stuff. And the real trick is to buy and hold and forget, for a long time, and just let the highs and lows average out, and the just sort of the normal secular increases in the value of the S&P or the Dow or whatever accrue over time. And people drive themselves crazy, sort of, obsessing about their stock portfolio. And anyway, he made the point, which I think is really good. He says, isn't that also true about this life portfolio thing? That if you are constantly sort of, and this happens to a lot of men my age, right? If you were constantly saying, did I pick the right woman? Is this marriage still good for me? Should I start over? But not just, sad middle-aged men. I think everybody does this to a certain extent, where you obsess about your life choices, about your portfolio. And if you have that attitude, you are more likely to, divest of things that you should leave in your portfolio. And I think it was just an interesting point in a way of thinking about this that hadn't occurred to me. But after I read the email, I was like, oh man, that's exactly right. So I thought that was worth saying.